When I was first starting out, I didn't have my client sign a contract. I just added some generic terms and conditions to the bottom of my invoices and called it a day. Spoilers, people suck, and I got burned a lot. So now I have a production contract that I have every client sign, and if you don't do that, you should. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Don't just blindly take legal advice from me. But this is the contract that I use that I've cobbled together from other contracts I've found as well as my own experiences. But always consult a legal professional before entering into a binding agreement. These are just the terms and conditions that I use so that way you can have a pretty good idea of what should be in your contract. So for starters, it's pretty straightforward. There will be an invoice that breaks down the charges that's attached to this, and so that invoice number will go up here at the top. And then throughout the agreement, I'll be referred to as producer, the client will be referred to as client. And as much as we think of a production contract as a way of protecting us from a bad client, it's also a layer of protection for the client so that way they can ensure that they're actually going to get what they pay for. All right, so provision 1 is I'm creating a video for the client. We're going to outline the details of that video at the very end in what's called Exhibit A. That's going to get referenced a lot in this contract. Everything's going to be based off what we list in Exhibit A. Provision 2 is ownership and assignment of the video. This is a big one. So the way I have it outlined in my production contract is once I create the video for the client and the client has paid for it, the client is the sole owner of the video. There's no restrictions. They can do whatever they want with it. They can post it wherever. They can charge for it. They can do anything they want with it. It's their property. However, they only own the finished video. They don't own any of the raw data files. So they don't own the raw footage I shot. They don't own any stock footage I purchased. They don't own the project file I used to make it. If you buy a cake from a bakery, you don't also get the recipe for how they made the cake. Same thing here. The client does not get my project files or the raw data files. However, if that's something the client is interested in, which does happen, maybe it's a company that they want to have those raw project files so down the road they can update the video on their own without constantly having to come back to me. That's totally fine. I have no problem transferring the raw data files and my project files to the client, but we need to explicitly state that here in Exhibit A, and there will be an additional charge for that. The other thing to keep in mind is if I'm going to hand over the project files, I'm not just going to give them the file I work with, because what happens is, as anyone who's worked with Photoshop for any number of time will tell you, graphic designers, creative people, we get kind of lazy and unorganized, and we always have that Photoshop document with just layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, copy 1, layer 4, copy 2, and nothing's labeled. We just click that eyeball on and off to see what layer it is. I'm not going to give a file like that to the client. So if a client is asking for the project files, I'm going to make sure everything's organized. I'm going to make sure everything's labeled. I'm going to make sure I also include any font files I use that aren't standard. I'm going to make the project file as simple to understand for clients as possible. And guess what? That's work, and that's work that gets charged for. Some people charge 25% of the total balance of the video for the raw files. Some people charge a flat rate. Maybe you charge $1,000 flat rate for the client to get those raw data files. It's up to you how you want to charge and what you want to break it down. I have seen cases where, as the producer, I would retain ownership over the finished video, and the client would then have a licensing agreement in place of where and when they can use it. Maybe the client can only use the video on their Instagram for a period of 6 weeks, after which time they either have to take it down or renew the licensing agreement with me. That's super rare. I've really only seen that happen in cases where maybe someone is doing a job at a discount. Maybe they're offering a discount on their normal rate. Then they'll put limitations on the usage of the video, but that's on a case-by-case basis. That's not the norm. The norm is just they own everything. But when you're discussing with your client beforehand, you should have an idea of what they're going to be using the video for. If it's a mom and pop shop and they're just going to be using it on their social media, that's different than we're a multi-million-dollar company and we're going to use this video as a nationwide ad campaign. Well, that video is going to have much more reach, and so you should be taking that into account when you're calculating your rates. And it's not because you're going to take advantage and rip off this big corporation. It's because in an instance like that, where a video is going to have much larger reach, there's usually higher expectations. There's usually tighter deadlines. There's usually faster turnarounds. They're usually going to be much more demanding. The bar is going to be set much higher. I say all this to say, when you're entering into an agreement, before you've even started anything, you should know the full scope of the project. You should know what they expect, where it's going to be shown, how it's going to be used, so that way you can tailor not only your production agreement, but also your production itself accordingly. A couple other sub-items in this provision that are really important is C and D. So provision 2C states the client agrees that ownership of the video assets and any and all intellectual properties will be transferred only upon receipt of payment in full to the producer. Until such time, producer will retain ownership of the video assets and any and all intellectual properties. Until the client pays me, I own everything. It doesn't become the property of the client until they pay me in full. This is super important because you may run into a difficult client who, after they pay you and you send over the assets, they then do a chargeback. Well, in that case, by doing that chargeback and revoking that payment, you're also revoking your ownership. They no longer own the video. And so if they try to use it, you can hit them with a DMCA takedown notice and remove the video. It's not theirs anymore. They didn't pay for it. We don't want to think our clients are going to screw us over, but it does happen, and so we have that layer of protection here just in case. Now, provision 2D, as the producer, I'm granted a royalty-free perpetual license to use the finished video for self-promotion. So I can use the video or portions of the video in my reel, on my website, in any kind of marketing or self-promotion of myself and my abilities. Now, I also own the raw data files, so if I wanted to take that raw footage and license it as stock footage somewhere, I totally can. It's my footage. I can do whatever I want with it. Again, unless we've transferred that to the client, as we stated in provision 2B. When we get down to delivery of the video, we're going to set due dates and milestones in Exhibit A. This is a layer of protection for the client that I'm going to deliver everything promised when we promised it. I'm going to deliver first drafts when we said we would. I'm going to deliver final drafts when I said we would. This also states that all the deliverables will be watermarked until the final payment is made, upon which time I'll remove the watermark and send them the final video without any restrictions. Do not ever send your clients an unwatermarked video until they have paid you, because that's a good way to not get paid. Don't fall for those clients who are like, oh, it's kind of hard to see. Can you take the watermark off so we can get a better look? Well, sure, if you want to pay me in full now, I'll go ahead and send that over. And then watch how all of a sudden their tune changes. I'm only going to send the final unwatermarked version once I receive that final payment. Provision 4 is my warranty. I'm stating that everything in that video is either created by me or licensed by me. Everything is going to be cleared. The music I use is going to be cleared. Any stock footage I use is going to be cleared. Any graphics I use are going to be cleared. I'm not going to put anything in this video that I do not have express permission to use. So this is a layer of protection for the client, because if that video gets flagged by a bot on YouTube for copyrighted music, it's not like I'm going to be like, oh, damn, that's crazy. Well, good luck, and walk away. I have that licensing agreement that I can send them so that way they can submit that and remove that claim. This is a layer of protection for the client that everything they receive from me is going to be cleared for the use we outlined, which is why it's important to find out a scope of the video. A nationwide ad campaign is going to have a different licensing agreement attached to it than a mom and pop's social media account. And so we need to make sure that if I'm going to license stock footage, if I'm going to license music, it's licensed for the use case we discussed. Provision 5 is payment. The client agrees to pay the full amount listed in Exhibit A. The client also agrees that a 50% non-refundable deposit is to be remitted before the producer will begin any production or pre-production, with the remaining 50% to be paid upon delivery of the finished video. It's up to you how you want to break this down. I've seen some people do 50% up front and then 25 upon delivery of the first edit, and then the remaining 25 upon delivery of the final edit. I just do 50-50, but it's up to you how you want to break it down. And you can always adjust this. You can talk with your client and find out what works best for them. The important thing to note here is that my 50% deposit is non-refundable. Now, why is it non-refundable? I have clients asking me this all the time. Why is the deposit not refundable? And that's because from the moment the contract is signed, I'm already starting work. And before I even show up to film, I've already done pre-production work. I've done location scouting. I may have done talent scouting. I may have spent money on props, costumes, production design. I may have rented equipment. I may have spent money on a crew. I may have travel expenses. There's money being spent, there's work being done before I even show up on set, and I need to make sure that I'm compensated for that. And I need to make sure I have the resources where if I need to rent equipment, if I need to pay a crew, if I need to buy stuff for the production, that I have those funds available. So the 50% is non-refundable. They don't ever get that back. That's also locking in that date for them. You book me for Saturday the 3rd, it's not like I'm going to have any other clients that day. That day is going to be blocked off for you. And if you cancel or you reschedule, I can't rebook that time. I may have turned down other gigs or rescheduled other gigs to keep that day free for you. So it's non-refundable to cover any out-of-pocket expenses. It's non-refundable to cover the initial labor that's going into the project. And it's non-refundable because it locks in that date. And then any delay in payment may result in additional charges at producer's discretion. If we agree that you're going to pay me 50% on the 15th, and the 15th rolls around and you don't have it, guess what? I may charge a late fee for not paying me on time. That's at my discretion. It depends on the circumstance. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It all depends on the situation. Provision 6 is my remedies of nonconformity. So what a nonconformity is, if the client feels the video I delivered does not meet the standards that we set in Exhibit A. When we list what the client wants and I don't deliver that, that's considered a non-deformity. The video does not meet the standards set forth by the client. This very rarely happens, but in the event that it does, at my discretion, I can offer reshoots, I can offer additional revisions to the video, I can go ahead and make whatever changes I need to get the video up to the client standard, and it's at my discretion what those will be. If a client reasonably determines in good faith that I'm unable to correct the issues and deliver a video that meets their standards, the client does have the option to terminate the agreement. They understand that if they do that, any deposits paid are still non-refundable. They're not going to get any money back, but I will provide them with the assets. So they're going to get the raw footage. They're not going to get my project files, but they will get any assets I've generated for them. I may decide to give them my project files depending on the circumstance, but again, that's at my discretion. So then provision 7 is changes in specifications. And so this is basically if the client decides to change their mind about what they want, or if they want to add to what they want. Maybe they want to add additional versions. Maybe they want to change the whole scope of the video. If at any time the client is going to make any changes to what we listed below in Exhibit A, then we're going to create an addendum to this agreement with an additional exhibit. So there'll be Exhibit B, Exhibit C, Exhibit D, and we'll have those new specifications listed out there. The client will also be responsible for paying 50% of the additional costs of those changes, and that's to be remitted by the client at signing. So when the client says, hey, can we add another shoot day at this location with 2 more actors? Sure, it's going to cost this much. 50% of that is due now, and we'll write that out and we'll add an additional exhibit as an addendum to this agreement. And then this is very important. Any changes in specifications that result in a significant deviation from the agreed upon project description listed in Exhibit A may be grounds for termination of agreement with any remaining balance to be paid in full. So if the client completely changes the scope of the project and it's vastly different than what we initially agreed on, I'm not obligated to do that. I can walk away and say, that's not what I agreed to. That's not what I signed up for. Thanks, but no thanks. Here's your footage. I'm going to leave. And I can terminate the agreement. Provision 8, cancellation and postponement. If a client cancels on me or asks to reschedule, and it's 1 to 5 working days from the shoot. So if they cancel the night before, if they cancel 3 days before, they're still responsible for that 50% non-refundable deposit, and they're also responsible for 15% of the remaining balance as a cancellation charge. Now, if they cancel more than 5 working days, so if it's a week or more out, they're only responsible for that 50% non-refundable deposit, which I've already gotten. So it's just further clarifying that they're not getting that back if they cancel, but they're not going to get charged a cancellation fee if it's a week or more out. Provision 9 is an indemnification. In layman terms, basically means if the client is going to give me anything, that they're going to have the rights to it. Just like I'm going to make sure that under my warranty, I'm not going to include anything that I don't have the rights to. Same thing with the client. If the client is going to give me assets, those assets are going to be cleared. That client is going to make sure that those assets are cleared. But more importantly, if the client tells me the video's for one use case, that's what I license everything for. And then they decide they're going to use it for a different use case, and those assets in the video now aren't cleared for that, I'm not responsible. The client is going to bear any liability from that. And so this basically protects me from any liability from any damages caused by the client in their use of the video. Provision 10 just states that I'm an independent contractor. The client has no employee obligations in regards to me. Provision 11 is arbitration, and this just states if we have any major disputes, we're going to court over it, and we're going to settle it in court. Originally, I had a clause in here that stated if we go to court, the loser has to pay the winner's legal fees. But then I had somebody point out to me, they said, I get what you think this is going to do, but let me explain to you what's actually going to happen. We're going to go to court. I'm going to get a team of the biggest, baddest, most expensive lawyers I can find. And when we win, I don't have to pay for it. It ain't coming out of my pocket. It's coming out of yours. So why would I cheap out? And so I realized he was right. And I changed this to, you pay your legal fees, I'll pay my legal fees. Provision 12 is a severability clause. Laws are always changing. Laws vary, sometimes state by state, sometimes county by county. And this just states, let's say we go to court and it's found that one of these provisions doesn't quite hold up. That doesn't invalidate the whole contract. It just invalidates that one provision, but not anything else. Provision 13 is a force majeure, which is basically just things that are outside of either party's control. Let's say there's a blizzard or a flood or a fire or an asymptomatic global pandemic that prevents us from filming. That ain't my fault. That ain't your fault. This states we'll do our best to work with the limitations we have. If we can't move forward, we'll put everything on pause. We'll pick it back up and resume as soon as we're able to. The SAG strike that was going on is a good example of this. You can't work on a union production with union actors if your union's on strike, so we would just have to wait the strike out and then pick things up once a new deal is in place. The other thing this covers is if any assets are lost as the result of a force majeure. So, good example, I was backing up footage for a client. There was a power outage. When power came back on, a couple of the files that were being copied at the time were now corrupted. Nothing could be done. Those files were lost. A big chunk of an interview we shot was now lost. That wasn't my fault. I know there was going to be a power outage. It's not the client's fault. They weren't the ones backing things up at the time. It was out of either of our hands. Wasn't my fault, wasn't the client's fault, but I'm going to make it right. I'll reshoot that interview at no charge. That's basically what this states here, is that if any assets involved in the production of the video are lost as a result of a force majeure, the producer will make a reasonable effort to reshoot or recreate said assets. If recreating assets is beyond reason, producer will in good faith provide a resolution or resolutions in an attempt to satisfy client. So let's say we're shooting an event and some footage is lost. Well, that's not really going to be easy to recreate. And if the client asked me, well, let's build sets and let's hire actors and let's recreate the event so we can recover this missing footage, that's not reasonable. It has to be a solution within reason. And so every situation is different. I'm going to do my best effort in good faith to find a solution in the event that something like that happens. And then provision 14, these are just general things we're all agreeing to. Things like, if it ain't in this contract, it doesn't count. The client can't be like, oh, well, we talked about doing this. Yeah, but it wasn't in writing, so it doesn't count. You can only change this agreement through documentable written notice. There's got to be addendums to this agreement if you're going to make any changes. If either party fails to enforce any right or remedy under this agreement, that failure is not a waiver of the right or remedy for any breach or failure by the other party. So a lot of stuff in here is at my discretion. If I choose not to charge a late fee, if I'm waiving that discretion, that doesn't mean I'm waiving all my discretions everywhere. It's just that one. Provision 14D is really important. The producer will create a maximum of 3 revisions per video. A revision constitutes any change or changes that will result in a new version of the video being delivered to the client. After 3 revisions, no further revisions will be made without incurring additional cost. I make sure the client understands this, that when I deliver a video, they will have 3 rounds of revisions before I start charging extra. Some people do 2 rounds of revisions, some people do 1, Some people do none. Some people do as many as it takes. It's up to you. For me, I found 3 to be the sweet spot, and I let clients know a revision is anytime I have to export a new version and send it to you. So if a client says, hey, looks great, can we make the text blue? Sure, that's one revision. Great, can we change the font? Sure, that's a second revision. Looks great. Can we change the song? Okay, that's 3 revisions right there. But if the client says, hey, it looks great, can we change the font and make it blue, and then can we change the song? I can do all that at once, so that's only going to count as 1 revision. If I'm exporting a version and sending it to you, that's a revision, and you only get 3 of those. Client agrees to finalize and approve any scripts, location, talent, or assets being used during the production of the finished video as listed in Exhibit A. If I'm going to go out and hire talent to be in the video, I'm going to send headshots to the client and have the client sign off on them, because I don't want the client coming back to me afterwards saying they don't like the talent I chose. Same thing with the location. I'm going to make sure the client signs off on any locations we use. I'm going to make sure the client signs off on any scripts or storyboards we use, because at the end of the day, it's about accountability, and I don't want the client coming back to me after all this work has been done and all this money has been spent and saying they don't like a particular aspect of the video. So I have it in writing that the client is going to finalize and approve any talent, assets, or locations that we're using and sign off on them to make sure we don't have any issues going forward. Only services listed on the accompanying invoice are being rendered with this agreement. Client understands that additional services will incur additional costs. The invoice will have the charges broken down. That's all that's going to be covered under this agreement. If the client wants more, they're going to get charged more. And this is basically stating, hey, if you want me to do extra work, it's going to cost you extra. And we're putting that in writing so that way there's no confusion. Both parties hold the right to terminate this agreement at any time for any reason. In such an event, any and all deposits remain non-refundable. So the client could say, you know what, this isn't working out. I could say, you know what, this isn't working out, and we'll go our separate ways. Client still didn't get their money back. In the event of termination, deliverables to the client are to be determined at producer's discretion. We go our separate ways. It's up to me what I'm handing over. There could be a situation where we've done 2 rounds of revisions, and now all of a sudden the client is like, you know what, this isn't working out. I want to terminate the agreement. Go ahead and send me the unwatermarked finished video as well as the raw footage in your project files. Guess what? That's not going to happen. I'm not going to give you the unwatermarked version, and I'm not going to give you my project files, but sure, if you want the raw footage, here you go. It's at my discretion what the client is going to get if this agreement is terminated. And then the very last page is Exhibit A. So this is what we're exactly agreeing to. I'll list the total that's on the invoice. Maybe for this particular video, it's going to be $7,500. That's going to be broken down on the invoice. I don't need to break it down here. Project due date. Maybe they want the first draft of the video March 1st, and maybe they have a team of people that are going to review it and have notes. We're going to go back and forth through those revisions until we get a final approval. So maybe they're expecting the final video no later than April 2nd, but they want that first draft March 1st so that way they have time to go through the video. And then project details. And so let's say we're doing a 30 to 45 second product video. And in this case, the client wants one SDR H.265 version of the video in UHD. They want one HDR DNxHR version of the video in UHD. Maybe they want a vertical 9x16 1080 H.265 version of the video for social media. We're going to deliver a 16:9 thumbnail image for YouTube and Twitter. We're going to do one 1x1 thumbnail image for Instagram. We're also going to deliver an SSD with the original footage, but not our project files, just the original footage. We're also going to provide them with copies of the talent releases for the actors we use. We're also going to provide them a copy of the location releases for the locations we shot at, and we're going to provide them with the licensing agreements for any stock footage we used. That way they can have a copy for their legal team just in case. And then I'll also list out exactly what the video is going to be. In this case, let's say it's a product video showcasing a new handheld Bluetooth credit card reader that pairs with PayPal and other payment processing applications. The video will showcase the product in a studio environment with 360 turnaround views and feature callouts, as well as showcasing the product in real-world use cases, including a mid-20s woman making a purchase at a local coffee shop, a male college student ringing up a customer at a bookstore, and a child taking payments at a lemonade stand. The company's brand identity is Bodoni font with hex color 1A8DC8. The company's corporate image is simple, life-changing products that anyone can use while pushing the bleeding leading edge of society's demands. So this is breaking down, here's the technical details of what I'm going to deliver. Here's a broad view look at what the video is going to be. And here's the company's brand identity that they want me to match. So this is the tone and vibe that the video needs to fit into. It needs to gel with this company's brand identity. These are all questions you should be asking your client in your initial meetings, finding out what their brand identity is. Getting as many details as possible, because the more details you have, the more accurately you can price things out for your client. When it comes time to shoot, you don't want there to be any surprises. You don't want to be like, we'll figure it out when we get there. You need to figure it out ahead of time. You don't necessarily need to have all the details in place when you sign the contract, but when you sign the contract, you should have at least known exactly what's being asked of you, what's being expected of you, and what the scope is going to be. Video will be the focus of a major ad campaign showcasing the launch of the product, including paid YouTube pre-roll ads, TV ads, and prominent placement on the company's website and social media. It's important to know where this video will be used, not only so you can charge appropriately, but also so that you can make sure if you're going to license any assets, whether it's music, stock footage, graphics, whatever it is, that they are licensed for that specific use case. You also need to know what the scope of this project is going to be. If it's in a major ad campaign that's going to be nationwide and on all these different platforms, you're probably going to get calls at 4:45 on a Thursday, and they need changes made to the video in time for them to use it in their 9 o'clock Friday meeting. So you're going to have tighter deadlines. You're going to have faster turnaround times. You're going to have a much higher standard to adhere to. It's also why you should be charging more in those cases. So you need to know technically what's being asked of you, artistically what's being asked of you, and you need to know what the scope is going to be. And then if you and your client look over everything, you can do everything they're asking for. They're totally fine with your terms and conditions. You both sign, date, you keep a copy, they keep a copy. And then once that 50% deposit is paid, then that pre-production work will really begin, and you'll start putting together storyboards, mood boards, you'll start talent scouting, location scouting, and you'll actually start the work of planning out the video. But these are the terms and conditions of my production contract. You should probably have similar ones in yours, but it's up to you. Everybody's use case is different. The important thing is just making sure that you and your client are on exactly the same page and everything is spelled out so there's no unwelcome surprises.